Alrighty, welcome everyone. We're just waiting for more people to come. So in the meantime, I'll be starting the video that we normally play at the start of our open classes. So to start with, here is a brief introduction on conjugation. So we learned last time, I think it was a while ago, but basic sentence structure-wise, we have subject, object, then predicate. So we talked about how this was the basic sentence structure and how there's going to be particles in between, but we also briefly touched on the fact that we're going to have some conjugation on the predicate being either an adjective or a verb. So a conjugative verb, which we're going to talk about a lot in detail today, is basically a variation of the dictionary form verb. What that means is that we're going to take a verb from the dictionary, and it's going to be given in this form called a dictionary form. Now we're going to change that modify that in a form that we can use in terms of a verb. So it's going to change the ending most of the cases, but basically they help us understand more with fewer words. What that means is that they help us identify more things without the need of additional grammar patterns or particles. For example, subtle nuances, tenses, or just a few of the examples that are reflected in conjugation use. It is worth noting that they are not limited to verbs, but we're only going to talk about verb conjugation for the purpose of this lesson. So the conjugation is going to go to the predicate. So here are some examples of what conjugations in Korean can convey. I will contrast it afterwards with English conjugations as an example of what conjugations look like in other languages. So in Korean, we have conjugations to convey tense. So basically past tense, present tense, future tense. We all know the deal. But basically in Korean, they are reflected in conjugation use. For example, we have 받았다, which is basically the past tense of receive, to receive. We then have the manner. So this is going to show us whether we're being, for example, declarative, inquisitive, whether we're exclaiming, or whether we're surprised after a realization about something. So neo can be used, for example, to show that I am surprised. In terms of formality, politeness, and honorifics, people tend to confuse these a lot, but today I will be clearly explaining whether there's a difference between them and how the difference comes about and how to differentiate them in terms of conjugation. So 해, for example, is casual impolite speech. I'll go through this in more detail with each slide, so I don't need to explain these for now, but basically there are different ways that conjugations can convey these. So when may conjugations not be used? They are used in most cases, it's just that it depends what the pattern is. For example, in writings, so consider the sentence, he eats. Normally, you would write as 그는 먹는다. Well, obviously, it depends on what kind of writing it is. For example, if you were writing to your boss or something, or if you were talking to someone of an older age than you might conjugate it in a different way, a slightly different way from this. But mostly, you would conjugate. That's the point of this slide. So basically, regardless of what the case is, unless you're talking to yourself or unless it's a very special case, you would normally conjugate in Korean, regardless of what the conjugation pattern may be. For example, 그는 먹는다. Here, plain form has been used. So if there was no conjugation whatsoever, the word eats would be in its dictionary form, which is 먹다. But because we add the conjugation 는다 to it, it becomes 먹는다. And we can say that this is an example of plain form. Now when you talk, in terms of conversation, we might have, for example, 그는 먹어요, or 그는 먹습니다. The former case being polite as well as informal, so like casual and polite. The latter case, 그는 먹습니다, is polite as well as formal. In spoken Korean, so colloquial Korean, you would rarely use plain form, but it's still conjugated. So notice how it's conjugated and not in its dictionary form. So it differs from other languages in the sense that for English, you have conjugation on POV, point of view. So basically, depending on whether it's first person, second person, or third person, you might conjugate things a little differently. It also depends on whether the word is singular or plural in other languages, such as English. However, Korean conjugations are only affected by these aspects. So the tense, whether it's in the past, the present, or the future, present continuous, so on and so forth. We even have the manner, like we've talked about, the subtle nuance differences, as well as formality differences, politeness levels, honorifics, passive voice, causation, modifying nouns, and indirect quotations. Today, we're not going to go through all of these for the sake of time. We're only going to go through, I think we're doing formality and tenses today. So to start with formality and politeness, we're going to talk about the general overview. So formality is situation-based. So this is where the difference comes in. In a formal work setting, or even at school, if you're writing an email to your school teacher, your professor, or even your boss at work, you might go for the extra formality, or even your colleague. Conversely, you might be texting in polite terms, but not formally to your friends or even your someone older than you. So formality is situation-based. What that means is that depending on what the situation is, it can change. However, politeness levels is a little different. For social status, age, all those factors come into play, and basically you might be talking to someone older than you, or you might be talking to, for example, someone of a higher social status, and they may require you to speak politely rather than focusing more on formality. So it depends on the case that you prioritize the formality or politeness. And obviously, it would be better if you could go for both at the same time, but there are some situations that may be better or more favorable if you use casual terms. For example, you wouldn't speak formally to your friend or something. So to start with the actual conjugation patterns themselves, we're going to start with casual and polite. So basically, we're going to start with hada verbs, and hada verbs, that is verbs that end with hada, these two syllables. We're basically going to take them off entirely, so hada will be removed. And we're going to replace it with he. For example, we have an example here. 공부하다, to study. Because it is a hada verb, ending with hada, we're going to remove hada and replace it with he. 공부해. And that gives us casual, but impolite. So like I said, 공부하다, 공부해. That is the final result. In terms of 운전하다, to drive, it's the same thing, pattern-wise. So basically, we're going to remove 하다, and we're going to replace that with 해. And that gives us 운전해. There's a polite, obviously there's going to be casual polite. And to get that, we're just going to add yo to the end. But apart from that, we're going to continue with casual impolite. So casual impolite, but with irregular verbs. So this is another exception to the normal rule that will be discussed later. But basically, an example is 줍다, to pick up. Now, to pick up, the stem, which is obtainable by removing 다. So by removing this ending syllable here, 다, we get the stem. The stem is 줍. And because 줍 ends with pi읍, this letter right here, in terms of the Hangul consonant ending, we're going to take that and we're going to replace it with u. And then we're going to continue to conjugate. So 줍다 would be 주우. And then the rule that I'm going to talk about will tell you this in more detail. But it will be required to add 어 to it. And that gives us 주우어. But then vowel contraction comes into play to turn them into diphthong. And then it will be 주워. So you'll get what I mean after I explain the normal rule. I'll come back to this just because we haven't talked about the normal rule yet. So there are more irregulars which won't be covered today. Yes, hello. Is it not working? Is it not working for anyone else? No worries. It is working? You might want to rejoin if that helps. If the stream isn't working for a lot of you, we'll restart the stream. Can you let me know in the chat or let me know verbally whether the stream is working or not? Everyone? Okay. Yeah, you might want to rejoin this the stream and the VC if that helps. Okay, that's good. So we're gonna talk about the actual normal rule. So for casual impolite, we're gonna take a look at the stem. So for now, we're only concerned with the vowel in the stem. Now the stem, like I said, is obtainable by removing ta. So for example, 닫다, to close. How do we get the stem? Can anyone answer that? The stem of any Korean word. Yep, we are gonna remove ta, like you said, correct, good job. And that gives us tat. And this syllable block, it has this vowel, right? 닫다 contains this vowel in terms of a stem. And because of that, we're gonna add a to it. To the stem, I mean. So like again, 닫다, to close, it means to close. And if we get the stem by removing ta, we're gonna be left with tat, this syllable block right here. I will just point it with a laser pointer. That. And because the tat syllable block contains either one of these two vowels, we're gonna add a to the stem at the end. And that gives us tada. And there's the other case, when the stem's vowel is anything else that is not either one of these two. An example of that would be 먹다. It means to eat, and because 먹다, you take the stem, which is gonna be 먹, after removing ta, and because it contains the vowel 어, and it's a vowel that is not one of these, we're gonna add 어 to the end. So it's gonna be 먹어 to the end of the stem. Now for both of these cases, vowel contraction is possible. Vowel contraction is something that I'll go through in more detail, I think on the next slide. But basically it entails taking the vowels and merging them together. I will go to the next slide now. Casual, impolite. So when the stem contains, we're going to talk about this case first. So any word for which the stem contains one of these two vowels, for example, 가다 or 닫다, we're going to talk about vowel contraction. So 가다 is a vowel, has the vowel a, right? So we know that it is this case, and it ends with the actual vowel. That is to say, not only does it contain one of these two vowels, it actually ends in it, the stem. So 가다, you get this stem by getting rid of the 다, and you're left with ka. And this ka over here, it not only contains this, but it also ends with this specific letter in the Hangul alphabet system. And because of that, we know to add a, but we're also gonna merge them together. So normally you would just be done with it after adding a, but we're also gonna merge them together. And by merging them together, we're left with just ka instead of ka-a. So the final form is ka. And for when it doesn't, so basically it contains the vowel, but it doesn't end in it, then we're just gonna be done with it after adding a to the stem. Make sense? Any questions so far? Okay, so I'm gonna continue with this case. So when it contains one of these two vowels, but it ends with either vowel, here's another example. 보다, to see. Again, it contains the latter, this O vowel, but it also ends in that same vowel. It doesn't just contain it, it doesn't have a 받침, it actually ends with the vowel in question. And we know that we're going to merge the vowel, but because the O and A, you merge them together to get wa, that's from Hangul class, we get pwa as our final form. Another example when it doesn't work like that, so 받다 just contains the vowel a, but it doesn't end with a because we have a 받침 here. 받침 meaning consonant ending letter. So because it ends with the tigut here, we're only going to be looking at whether it contains one of these, and because it does, we're just going to add a, and we're going to be done with that. Make sense? Okay, so can you tell me what exactly you're confused about? Or O? You don't change it in the other case because we have a 받침. apachim is a consonant ending. So I'll tape it in the notepad for you to get. 1 second. Discard. Yeah, I think a lot of other people won't get it too. I'll go through it briefly. So basically, if we have a word that like this, how do we get the stem again? Or no, we get the stem. So the stem is our first step. To get any stem of any Korean word, we're gonna remove ta. So we're gonna take out the ta, and that gives us this. Now this stem on its own doesn't do much. It's not really useful in any way until we conjugate it. And we conjugate it in this case, we learned that we add the a to it, as you can see here, the highlight yellow. But because the stem ends with a consonant, right? So it contains the vowel, but it doesn't end with the vowel in question. It ends with another thing, the consonant. It ends with this. So this may be a bit confusing, but after some practice, you'll get it right. Because it ends with the consonant, we're just gonna end it there. We're not gonna merge the vowels or anything like that. But in a case where it does end with the vowel, for example, 보다, or even what other examples are there? Let me think. 가다 or 자다. All these are examples where the stem actually ends with one of the vowels, one of the two vowels that we've talked about. So by removing ta, we get ka, and it doesn't have a consonant ending. It just ends with this. And because it ends with that, we're gonna do that, but we're also gonna merge them together to get ka, or cha in the other case. For the rest of it, so we have this case. So this is a case where the stem contains a vowel, but it is not one of these two. So we said previously, in this slide, that we're gonna add this to it, 어. Now, an example of this being 먹다. But 먹다 becomes 먹 for the stem, and we're gonna add 어 to it. That gives us 먹어. But there are some cases where we're gonna do the same whole vowel contraction thing. Or not this. And that is an example. So this is the example. So it doesn't end with these two, but when it ends with either of these two, u or e, we're still gonna be concerned with vowel contraction. So when the vowel is not one of these, the vowel that it contains is not this, but it is one of these two, we're gonna be concerned with vowel contraction. So 춤을 추다. So 추다 is the word here, to dance. Now when it ends with u, so notice how u is a vowel that is different from these two. And it actually ends with it. It's not just containing it, it ends with it. We're gonna add 어, but we're also gonna merge them together. And that gives us 춰. 춤을 춰요. 춤을 춰. 추어 becomes 춰. Here's another example of when we would be contracting the vowels. 달리다. We get the stem by removing 다, and that gives us 달리. And we're gonna add 어 to it. 달리어. And 달리어, it sounds weird, right? It already sounds weird. And the stem actually ends with the E, the vowel, one of these two cases. So we're going to combine the vowels together to give us 달려. E plus 어 makes us 여 in terms of Hangul. That makes sense, right? Does anyone have any questions, or can I move on to casual polite? Casual polite is a lot easier after you understand the previous part. Okay, so casual polite, all you have to do, so I'll change the wording a bit to be casual. Not there. So casual polite, all you have to do is add yo to the actual casual impolite. So once you have the casual impolite version, all you're gonna do to it is add this syllable block, which is yo. And by doing so, you get the casual polite version. For example, we previously said that 탔다, after you remove the ta to get the stem, tat, and because it contains the vowel, we're gonna add a, tada, and that is where we stopped. But that is only for casual impolite. And because we're now gonna say it in polite terms, we're gonna add yo to the end. Similarly, we have 먹다, and that becomes 먹, and then 먹어 for the impolite case. But however, since we're gonna speak politely, we're gonna add yo to it. And again, vowel contraction is possible in terms of how you get to step 2. Step in between here, before you add the yo. Alrighty, before I move on, does anyone have any questions or confusion with the casual, impolite, and polite? Now, I know that it is confusing, but in terms of the grammar pattern, it's basically just memorization and then practice. That is all that you can do. Oh, yes, sure. Our hada verb is the same case, but it is easier to memorize it in the he, the one I explained. So it is technically vowel contraction, but because it's a different case entirely, like it's not a different case entirely, but it's more like a separate case on its own because a lot of verbs end with hada. It is sometimes easier to think of it as just replacing it entirely with he. So instead of thinking of like vowel contraction and all that, it might be easier to just think of it as hada, you replace that entire thing with he. Some things are better when memorized. Does that make sense? Can I move on to formal, or do any of you have any other questions? Alrighty, hello? Yeah, because he is just gonna give us the casual impolite version. To get the polite version, you would still add you. So for example, 식사해요, 요리해요, what else? 운동해요, 공부해요. Yep, that is correct. Thanks for pointing out. And we'll move on to formal. So formal impolite is just the plain form that I've talked about previously, the one that is used often in writing. So this is pretty easy, comparably. So when the stem ends with a consonant, for example, 탔다, you get the stem by removing da, and it gives us tat, right? And it ends with the D sounding 디귿 syllable, and that is a consonant. So all we're gonna do to it, we take the syllable block and add 는다 to it. So it becomes 닫는다. For the case that it ends with a vowel, for example, 가다, it ends with a vowel because we know that by removing da, we're left with ka, the one over here. Just get out my laser pointer. The one over here, and it ends with a, which is a vowel. And because of it, we're going to take this pattern and we're going to place it underneath. So this nian comes underneath and the da ends it off. So an example of that being, I don't know why that example is like that. It should be 간다. And yeah, 간다. Moving on, formal polite. So does anyone have any questions about formal impolite? So we're going to look at whether it ends with a consonant or whether it ends with a vowel. And accordingly, we're going to add either 는다 or this nian and then ta. Right. I'll move on to formal polite then. So when the stem ends with a consonant, we're going to add 씁니다 to be politer than the other case. So that gives us tat. And since tat ends with 디귿, which is a consonant, we're going to add 씁니다, this entire thing, and we're going to slap it at the back, like 닫습니다. So when the stem ends with a vowel, which is the other case, we're going to take the stem, which is ka in this case, this example, and we're going to add 비읍 and then 니다. This whole thing goes at the end, and that gives us 갑니다. Make sense? Now, like I've said, the patterns are easier when memorized, and after you memorize them, you're going to do a lot of practice, and that's going to basically solidify your understandings of conjugation. There is no other way, realistically speaking. for the conjugation patterns themselves, you will have to memorize them. So to start on tenses, before I do that, does anyone have any questions about the formality, politeness, those two? Yes, hello? Oh, 하다 verbs, it would be like, because it ends with a vowel, it will just be 합니다. Because 하다, you just treat it as this case over here. So basically 하다 is 하다 and it ends with a vowel. 하 and has the 아 vowel and it ends with that. We're gonna add 비읍니다. So that gives us 합니다. So 운동합니다, 요리합니다, or even I don't know. 공부합니다 and such. And for this, the same thing, because 하다 ends with the vowel in terms of the stem. Like the stem as in, so okay, I'll give you an example here. So 공부하다, people, some native Korean speakers, they sometimes think that the stem is just 공부, but that is wrong. The fundamental rule of getting the stem is just removing 다, because the stem is only used for conjugation. We're not going to talk about whether it's a noun, whether it's grammatically correct. We're never going to use a stem in its pure form. So basically, it gives us 공부하. And because 하, it ends with a vowel, which is this. We're just going to add 한다. Like that. Another case, 요리하다, 요리한다. 공부, I've already done that. 운동한다. Yeah, so 한다. And the other one would be 합니다. Makes sense? We treat it as this case. It's not really an exception. Can I move on? Or anyone else have any questions? Alright, I'll go through tenses then. So present tense is basically the same as plain form. So we're gonna take the stem, and based on whether it has a consonant ending or a vowel ending, we're gonna add either one of these two. So the case where it has a consonant ending, so 먹, it has the 받침 기역, and that is a consonant. And as such, we're gonna add 는다 to the end. 먹는다. 그는 먹는다. For the vowel case, when it ends with a vowel, the stem itself, we're gonna add 니은 다. So that gives us 간다 for 가다. 그는 간다. For the past tense, it gets a little confusing, again, because we have vowel contraction that may come into play. But basically, we take the stem's vowel, and when it's either one of these two, again, we add the 아따. And because for this example we have here, we already have a case where it ends with the vowel in question. For example, 가다, 보다, 자다, all those end with the vowel, as in one of these two vowels. And because of that, we're going to combine them together. We're going to be with the merged vowel 갔다, and that gives us 갔다 as its final form, not 가았다. For the other case, 없다 will be used. So basically, when the vowel is anything but these two, as in other than these two, for example, 먹다, it doesn't contain one of these two vowels, it contains 어. We're gonna just add 없다 to it, but again, vowel contraction is possible, and a case is like this. So 달리다, because the vowels so basically the vowel is not one of these two, but at the same time, it is one of the cases that we've mentioned for the case where we would still contract the vowels, and that gives us 달리다, 달리, 달렸다, instead of 달리었다. So normally, if we don't have vowel contraction, it would be 달리었다, but because we have vowel contraction, because we have one of these two vowels, we're gonna combine e and 어, and that gives us 여. And because of that, we're going to conjugate it as 달렸다. 그는 달렸다. For the case where, another example of the case where we have the vowel contraction for the 아따 case, when the stem's vowel is 아 or 오, for example, 보다, 보다 stem is just 보, and it ends with this vowel, right? this vowel over here, the O. And because of that, we're gonna take the po and we're gonna add atta to it. So that gives us po atta. But because it ends with the vowel O, we're gonna make it poatta. We're gonna merge the vowels together and that gives us poatta. Makes sense? For 했다, so 하다 will just be 했다. That's an easy way to think about it. So all 하다 verbs, you can just think of it as 했다. So 공부하다 becomes 공부했다, 운전하다 becomes 운전했다, 요리하다 요리했다, 게임하다 게임했다, so on and so forth. Instead of 하다 하었다, we're just gonna remove it entirely and get 했다 to add to the end of it. 그는 운전했다, 그는 공부했다. So this is future tense. Before I go on to future tense, does anyone have any questions? In terms of past tense, present tense, or even the formality cases? Or even a little bit of both? I will check the text channel. No questions here, I think. Yep, I'll move on to the future tense then. So future tense, we have either one of these two cases, 을 것이다, 을 거다, or 리을, and then 것이다 or 거다. So consonant ending stems such as 먹다, we get the stem by removing 다, and that gives us 먹. Because it ends with a consonant, 기억, we're just gonna add 을 것이다, 먹을 것이다. 그는 감자를 먹을 것이다. For the vowel ending stems such as 가다, we take the stem and it's ka obviously, the one over here in step 2, and because it ends with a vowel, we're just gonna add 리을 것이다, and that 리을 goes underneath, and we're gonna add this entire thing 것이다 at the end, and that gives us 그는 갈 것이다. Make sense? That is pretty much it for the conjugations that we're going to talk about today. But when many conjugations are involved, for example, tense and politeness or formality, we're going to do it in this order. So an example of that would be 먹다. So 먹다, in terms of the past tense, if you wanted to say ate, but in a formal and polite way, we're going to do so like this. 먹었. So that's to show the past tense, and then we're gonna add 씁니다 to it. Another case will be like 닫다. So that would be 닫았 씁니다. And normally it is 씁니다 because we have the consonant ending here, and that's more common. Another example might be 보다. So 보다 would be 보, the stem. And then we add a, and we merge the vowels together to get 보았, and 보았습니다. 영화를 봤습니다. Yeah, so that is basically how you mix them together to have a more complex conjugation that takes both of them into account. So the tense and the formality and politeness, all at the same time. So that is what I mean by conjugations can convey all of those without the need of additional particles or other words. Make sense? Alright, we're gonna do a Kahoot next unless someone has a question. If you do have a question, please ask it now. I'll give you about 1 minute. Questions, anyone? If you don't have any questions, I'll be doing the Kahoot now. Alright, Unicorn has one. Feel free to ask. I get that this is really difficult. You probably wouldn't understand it straight away if this is your first time learning conjugations. So you might as well ask questions to clarify them. If you would not like to talk it, like say it out loud, you can also type it in open class text channel if that works better for you. Because after that, I'll be doing the Kahoot. And I got the better paid version of Kahoot, so more people can join now. And more different question types. 을 거예요 and 을게요. So that is the case where it's polite as well as polite and casual. So 을게요 and 을 거예요, they're basically interchangeable. It's just that it's kind of like the case we have here with the 을 것이다 versus the 거다. So it depends on whether you want to sound a bit less formal, I guess. So more people might opt for it. Depends on the person. So like I personally don't say 을 것이다. So like I never really say 그는 감자를 먹을 것이에요. I never really say that. I just end up saying 그는 감자를 먹을 거예요. Overall, generally speaking, people just regardless of this even, normally people don't say it in formal. They normally say it in casual. A lot of the cases. Now there are some resources that will tell you that formal is masculine and casual is feminine. That's not really right. It used to be like that, but now it's not really like that anymore. And men can say 예요 or 예 or 이야 the other way. Vice versa is also true. So overall, I would personally personal suggestion. I would personally recommend you to go with casual and polite most of the times. Unless you're talking to a friend, then you might be opting for impolite, but as well as informal, like casual. So that would just be the case without the yo. Does that answer your question, kinda? I think someone else had another question, but I'm not sure. If you have a question, you might ask now. And for the rest of you, I recommend you to open Kahoot. Kahoot.it is the exact address. And then I'll give you the pin, and then we can start with the Kahoot. Normally you conjugate it no matter what. So even if it's writing or even if it's speaking. So in colloquial terms, like I've explained, I'll just, why is my mouse not working? I think my computer's frozen in general. No. So I think I kind of touched on it a bit in here. Or no, here. So normally you would conjugate it. It's just that it depends what pattern it is. So without conjugation, all the dictionary form verbs will be given in their dictionary forms, such as 먹다 for to eat, or 가다 for to go. And normally you would never use that dictionary form. You would always conjugate it in one way or another. So it depends on the case. So the case I talked about today were regarding tenses and formality and politeness. Does that kind of answer your question? So normally you always have to conjugate. Yep. No worries. Can I start the Kahoot now, or does anyone else have any questions? And for those of you just arriving, okay, someone's requesting to see the present tense slide. So the present tense slide, I can show you that. It's just gonna be, where is it? The plain form. The slide organization isn't the best, but I'll find it. I think it's here. Yep. Present tense. So basically you add either 는다 to it or 니은 and then 다 to it based on whether it ends with a consonant or a vowel. 하다 and 해다. So the 해다 is not past tense. 하다 would be in terms of past tense 했다. And I think I talked about that today, right? I'm not sure. I should have. Yeah. So past tense wise, you take 하다 and then you replace it with 했다. instead of just 해다. Does that make sense? I'll go back to the present tense slide. Do you have any questions about the present tense? Where'd it go? Yes. Or are you just taking notes? Alright, I'll move on to the Kahoot then. If that's okay. Okay. So here's the pin. So for those of you who don't know how the Kahoot works, you might want to get another device, and then we're gonna join this based on this pin. Can you hear the music, by the way? I kind of want to make it so that you hear the music. The stream still works, right? Yeah, so join the Kahoot. It's kahoot.it, and then you key in the pin. You should get another device so that you can look at the questions and answer it at the same time. And I'll be waiting for almost all of you to join. And I'm proud to announce that we have Faker on the game. I knew it. Is anyone else trying to join? Is their internet connection bad, or can I start? You can also join as we go along, but this Kahoot doesn't have as many questions as we used to have for the other Kahoots. I think it's about 10 to 12-ish. I'll start the Kahoot then. If anyone is trying to join but they're having issues, can you just text me via DMs or in the text channel? Thank you. Someone's typing, so I'll just wait for them. I'll start. You can always join. The pin will be down there in the bar at the bottom. Oh, that is just a slide. And so is that. Yeah. So we compared Korean conjugation to other conjugations found in other languages. Yep, most of you got it correct. Tense is what we covered today, and it can convey tense through conjugation. So rearrange the options. Which of these accurately represents a possible Korean sentence structure? So it's not the basic one. For those of you who are at the previous open classes, you might know. If not, you may not know. So where does one of them go? I'm sure most of you will be confused at one of them specifically. I'll be skipping with 5 seconds to go. Alright, So the correct order is subject, object, adverb, then predicate. So an example of that would be 저는 밥을 빨리 먹어요. True or false? Plain form may be used in writing. That is correct. We said that plain form is another conjugation form identical to present tense and that can be used in writing. Wow, most of you got it correct. So it's politeness and formality is situation based. Tense wouldn't really matter as much in proportions. This is kind of a trick question, by the way. Oh, damn. Remember the case where, I think I have the explanation slide. Oh, I don't. But basically there's the case where it's O or E, remember? So the merging of the vowels. Yep. Either yellow and red was correct. Most of you got the red one though. Yeah, so irregular verbs can also end up having the contraction. And yeah. But however, be irregular will have vowel contraction due to its nature in conjugation, whereas tiget irregular has no contraction. Most of you got it correct. So it's asking for the pattern that shows tenses. Yep, it's the future tense one. Alright, congrats. Unlike the anniversary event, you won't be getting any prize. But yeah, good job. It shows that you understood conjugations well. And yeah, thank you for coming to my lesson today. I will be doing another one, possibly on conjugation.